Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is good to see you all. Man, I love seeing everyone in the chat. Good to have you here. Those of you that are joining from work, joining from play, joining from across the globe. I love it. And I know all three of those things are true because, well, I guess I know things. It is good to be here. Today, we are going through claim number 3. And, well, before we do that, before we dive into the third claim from ADL on Daniel and Antiochus, before we watch this short little clip, it's going to be about a 2-minute clip today where this claim is brought up on the full, 38-minute video. Before we do that, I'll just say this. If you like what it is that we're doing here at the Thinking Cup here on the live stream, whether it's here, whether it's in Discord, whether it is on the website, if you appreciate that and you're looking for ways to plug in, ways to get kind of supportive of the community, whether that's just by engaging in the Discord channel, interacting, helping out if need be, giving ideas for upcoming conversations, or financial. If you're willing to do that and that's something that you're interested in, scan the code in the upper right-hand corner. Just scan it. That is the contact info. You'll find all the links there. I do want to say a huge shout out to several of you that have been financially supporting the ministry. I appreciate that. I know not all of you can, and I don't expect all of you to. So I want to give a huge shout out to those that have been able to do that. Just for a kind of a follow-up, all the funds that you give, whether it's on the website, whether it's through a Patreon account, which is another place on that code, if you'll scan the code, you can actually head over to the Patreon account. And you can subscribe there. That's like ongoing systematic financial help. All of those funds go to support the website platforms. Also the program that I will eventually currently search program. So head over to the page and check that out. I can't do my links or anything, so that's interesting. So with that being said, I think it's probably about time. And with that, we got kicked out. Oh, goodness gracious. Is the audio not working either? It should be working now. Hopefully it is. Let me know if it is working properly. Something happened with the system, and just let me know before I keep moving forward if everything is good. All right. I don't know what happened. Apparently it is the Antiochus goblins that are wreaking havoc on the internet lately. Apparently, they also took down Amazon servers, Microsoft servers, who knows what. I don't know if that was Antiochus or if it was something else. Anyways. All right, well, let's kick this off with the actual video that we are going to be looking at. Now, since I got kicked out, I'm going to have to jump in to load the video itself again. So give me 1 second while I get this up and running. And here is the video that we will be addressing today with the third claim.
It says, and in the latter time of their kingdom.
Yeah.
When the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. They say this points to it, Antiochus Epiphanes, because it's Antiochus Epiphanes. But the word in verse 23 says, in the latter time of their kingdom. In the latter time of their kingdom. Was Antiochus Epiphanes at the latter time of the kingdom?
No. No.
Let's look at this. Let's look at all the Seleucid kings. Okay. The first king, of course, was Seleucus, right? When Alexander the Great ruled, right? He eventually died. The land of Greece was divided in 4 parts, and I think one of them was Seleucus, Cassander. Help me out, Randy. Ptolemy and
Lysimachus.
There you go. So Seleucus is one of the 4 kings that Greece was divided into. Let's look at what King Antiochus IV was. King number 8. The prophecy says, at the end, the latter end of their kingdom, shall one come. Is Antiochus Epiphanes coming at the latter end of this kingdom?
No.
He was number 8 of 29, friends.
Mercy.
I always bring this up. My friend Rondell says to his wife, we're having 29 kids, and we're on kid number 8. We're at the latter end now. Does that make sense?
No, it does not. Mercy.
He was not at the latter end of the kingdom, friends. 8 out of 29 is not the latter end of the kingdom. That's point number 2.
Mercy. Mercy. I don't mean to make fun in any way, shape, or form, but that is a very weak argument. Now, here is the argument that we are addressing. This is what was said. Okay? What was claimed was that the fierce king, or the little horn, arises in the latter time of their kingdom. That's Daniel 8:23. That is, and this is what they claimed, okay, as they kind of worked through the supposed 4 kings, okay, at the very end of the 4 Greek divisions. Because of that, and since Antiochus IV reigned relatively early in Seleucid history, they claimed 8 of 29 kings. That's what they claimed. He cannot be that figure. Therefore, that's their supposition. Therefore, the prophecy must point to a much later power. For example, their love relationship with Rome. That is the claim. Okay? Mercy. Mercy, mercy, mercy. Now, you guys know when we do things here, we do them very detailed. So I'm going to get my screen shared here. Again, I apologize. I had to get everything kind of working through. So I want to examine this claim. Remember what the actual claim is. I'll be coming back to it, okay? But in order for us to do a robust rebuttal of this Antiochene perspective, the idea that in the latter time of their kingdom, like clearly they didn't reign then, so it can't be him, okay? In order for us to be fair to this situation, we're going to cover the linguistic matter, we're going to cover a syntactical matter, historical matter, and we're going to go into David's own apocalyptic idioms that get used inside of Daniel. Again, we don't do things easy here. Now, let's go to, oh, this is not the right, let's again, all of my stuff is all gotten, there we go, that's better. Okay, there we go. Let's go, while you're here, let's go to Daniel 8:23. Now, we're going to read this here. This is now, I have the NRSV. I'm actually going to switch over to the KJV real quick. And the reason I'm going to do this, I'm not going to put that parallel text up there, is just to give you, you'll see a couple of different versions coming up, okay? But the KJV says, in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. Now, in order to be fair to this, it is really important. I want to show you just a couple of different, this is what's called a text comparison. So we're going to look at, on the left-hand side, this is the KJV that we've literally just got done looking at. You're going to notice these blue and red circles. These are differences in the comparative text. You'll notice that 0% difference here. You'll notice the nuances of them in these different ones. Now, I've got somewhere around like 360 different Bibles. We could do this with a bunch of them. I've picked the NRSV, okay, NRSVU, which you can see kind of, we're analyzing this first section. And in the latter time of their kingdom, here it says at the end of their rule, at the end of their rule. It's a little bit different. NASB says, and in the latter period of their dominion. ESV says, very similar to the KJV, and at the latter end of their kingdom. Lexham English Bible says, and at the end of their kingdom, very similar here. NLT, which is a very dynamic translation, says at the end, at the end of rule, when there's, I can't see all that here. Hold on a second. I have to see the rest of it. At the end of their rule, when their sin is at its height, a fierce king, a master of intrigue, will rise to power. Now, you can see that the NLT does quite a bit of their own translating, okay? Quite a bit of it. So just pay attention. Now, I'm going to switch views here real quick. All right, there we go. That's good. I got to make sure I got the views proper here. So here's what I want to do first of all. If you're looking at the text, here, I always want to point out the original language. At the end of their rule, at the very bottom, you'll see the manuscript transliteration. Again, I'll say this again. You'll see number 3 here, 4, and 5. So when you're reading this, because Hebrew goes right to left, you're going to read the number 3 first, then 4, then 5. So this is actually aarit, malkhūtām is what it is, okay? Again, I'm working on my Hebrew. Don't judge me on my lack of pronunciation. So I want to first look at the lexem, or the lexical word here for aarit. Now, in order to do this, it's really important that we go to good resources while we're looking at this information. So I want to take you to the lexem. We're going to go to the DBL Hebrew. This is the Dictionary of Biblical Language with semantic domains. Semantic domains is really important because if you understand the Hebrew language has density to the words themselves. Very similar to English. You know that if you say run can mean lots of different things depending on the context. That would be, it has a semantic domain, okay, in English. Now, what you're looking at here, and let's just go back so you understand what's going on. You'll see down here the Strong's number 319. That's just an identifier number. So 319, you'll see Strong's 319 so that we're on the same word here. You'll see the actual transliteration here, aarit, and you'll see 6 different potential definitions or contextual or senses, contextual definitions. And you'll see some examples as to how these potentially are used, okay? I just want you to see the bolded letters here. You can use last. It might be future, descendant, least, remainder, far side. There's a lot of different uses. Now, another resource that we would go to is something like the Lexham Analytical Lexicon of the Hebrew Bible. This is a fabulous resource to kind of work through some of the items that we're talking about. I'm not going to do this for every single resource, but I want to do this for a few because I want you to understand the density and the potential domains that can be used, the different ways that this word can be used. Here's the same word, aarit, and you've got end, latter, end as in the end of state, final state. You also have end as in time period, end as in point of time, future, descendant, remainder, least, remotest part. Now, what you have to understand when you're dealing with words like the Hebrew language, what you should not be doing is going to something like the Strong's Concordance, which I'll not use names as to who does this, okay? But what you would not want to do is you would not want to just go to the Strong's Concordance, which this is the Strong's Concordance, okay? Here's the word, and then say, well, it means any of these. I'll pick and choose which one I like. That's a horrible way to handle the text. And remember, Strong's Concordance functions in a way that it organizes the English. It takes the word itself, and then it tells you the way in a specific Bible. Okay, this specifically is in the King James Bible, how that Hebrew word gets translated. It doesn't tell you why. It doesn't tell you how. It doesn't give you any linguistic contextualization, meaning it doesn't give you any backing as to why you would use specific words, okay? Strong's Concordance is a horrible way to try to handle the text properly. Now, that is aarit. You see at the bottom, it says there's a sense. You're going to get kind of where we're going in just a second. The end of a time period. Also, this malkhūtām, this particular, these two words here combined give you this period of time. It's their rule. It gets translated their kingship or their dominion. It's referring to, and I want you to pay attention to the reference here. If you see there, who is there? Who is the there referring to? Now, ADL did properly identify this. It's the four kingdoms, okay? It's not four kings, it's four kingdoms arising from Alexander's empire. How do we know this? Well, you can go back here and you can look at verse 2, right? Four kingdoms shall arise from his nation. From whose nation? Well, you need to go back further up to verse 8. Okay, if you scroll all the way back to verse 8, you'll notice the beginning of kind of the situation. Then the male goat grew exceedingly great. So we're talking about the male goat. But at the height of his power, the great horn was broken, and in its place there came four prominent horns toward the four winds of heaven. Okay, the male goat. Keep that in mind. The male goat. Who is the male goat? The male goat is the king of Greece. Who's the king of Greece? This is why the king of Greece is connected to Alexander the Great, Alexander's empire, okay? At the end of their rule is referring, notice what it's saying. At the end of their rule, it's referring to the four kingdoms arising from the male goat, king of Greece, Alexander's empire. All right. So, we at least have contextually, okay, we understand the words, we understand kind of the who are things referring to. I do need to actually get into one other part of the text. We need to talk about the transgressors. Notice in the text, depending on the version that you use, when the transgressions have reached their full, at the end of their rule, and here is the definition of what it means to be at the end of the four kingdoms, their rule. Here's the definition. Here's what to look for. When the transgressions have reached their full power. Now, this phrase here, when the transgressions, notice down in the bottom part, you have 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, this is I'll start here. This is kind of this is chatem ha posiem. Okay, I probably totally obliterated that. This is an idiom, and the idiom here is describing. You've heard me talk about this before. I talked about it in at least the first or the second episode about the moral corruption that's going on. So this is an idiom that's describing moral ripeness for judgment. Well, how do you know that? Well, we see this other places. Again, this isn't just Mike saying this. I'm going to go to Genesis 15:16. Here's another idiom for what's going on. And they shall come back here in the fourth generation. Here's another parenthetical. For the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. When it's complete, then there will be full judgment. That's the concept. You also see this in 2 Chronicles 36:16. But they kept mocking the messengers of God, despising his words, and scoffing at his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord against the people became so great that there was no remedy. So just pay it. So this is the idiom that's going on in the text. So the phrase itself, if we go back to Daniel, this at the end of their rule, when the transgressions have reached their full measure, here's the way that could naturally be rendered. During the later phase of their rule, when iniquity has reached its full measure. That's the idea. Not necessarily at the very end of all Hellenistic domains. Now, that's the argument that Jason makes on the video. Well, how could this possibly be Antiochus? Because he's number 8 child of 29. I'll get to that. There actually wasn't 29, but I'll get to that, okay? So linguistically, when you're looking at the actual language, linguistically, aarit is relative. It can mean later period within an ongoing kind of time period or an ongoing section of time. That's what it can mean. The way other places that I'll just give you a couple of cross references because I don't like to just say it's this way. I would prefer you to see in the text how it gets used so you know where this is coming from. So if we go back to, I'll give you some examples, okay? Remember, aarit is relative. It's relative to what's going on. An example that you would cross-reference this with is Psalms 37 and 38, for example. You wouldn't know this by looking at the English, but this is highlighted in red because notice it's the same word. It's aarit. It's the same thing. It's an endpoint. It's a time period that's an ending point. An ending point of what? Well, mark the blameless and behold the upright, for there is posterity for the peaceable. But transgressors shall be altogether destroyed. The posterity of the wicked shall be cut off. Again, notice that does not mean it's at the very end of the world. I don't know how you would define that inside of what Jason was thinking, okay? You get this also if we go to Isaiah 2:2, in the days to come. Well, that's interesting. Yes, that is the same word here. Okay. Aarit ha-yamim. Okay. This is a point in the future. It's not like at the very, 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 very end. Again, just understand contextually what's going on. You've got another example. I'll give you this last example. This is Jeremiah 48:47. And this sounds really familiar. Okay. Yet I will restore the fortunes of Moab in the aarit, latter days, says the Lord. Now, when is that? Is that the end of the world? Is that when is it? Well, it's defined by a period of time when God is going to bring judgment. That's what it's defined as. Okay. It's not exclusively the final instant. And that's the point. Okay. That's the point I want to make. Okay. The second area I want to work through, I want to work through some internal parallels in Daniel's usage. When I say internal, I'm talking about, it's really what we've looked at is we've looked at the lexical word, okay, of aarit, along with those surrounding words. But what we haven't looked at is how does Daniel use the word? So when I say internal parallels, I'm referring to how Daniel uses this word in his own language. Now, I say in his, some of you have asked me to do a video on the authorship and dating of the book of Daniel. Now, I'll do that at some point. I don't know that I can do that yet, but that is a fascinating discussion, and how you define that or how you defend your opinion on that, which, by the way, it is a very heated debate, does inform some of what you conclude in some of this, okay? Now, the book of Daniel uses aarit and its Aramaic cognates, which is beʻaḥarīt, okay? And Aramaic gets used in different sections of Daniel. One of the things I'll bring up when I do the video on the dating is there is what's called early Aramaic uses and there is late Aramaic uses. So the language itself, language is no different back then as it is now. Language travels and it changes. And so you have early Aramaic words and things that are done that we see present in the text. We have later Aramaic words that are used that are present in the text. This is actually why some date Daniel later versus earlier. So I won't let you in on all of my argument for that, but that is part of it. Okay. I want you to see the flexibility that beʻaḥarīt does within Daniel itself. Now, what we're going to be doing inside of Logos as it comes up, what we're going to be doing is we're going to look at, this is doing an actual word search for the manuscript word, not the lexical word, okay, which is the dictionary entry. We're looking at the actual manuscript entry of the word. And I'm defining this search to be only within Daniel. Now, I have included the Aramaic items in this. So you'll see some, that's a whole nother dialogue, but I want you to see some of these, okay? Daniel 2:28 is actually an Aramaic rendition of the word. So this particular, actually, let me do this just to make it a little easier for you guys to see here. So here in Daniel 2:28, you'll have aarit, ladder. This is an Aramaic rendering. So what would that mean? In the latter days, what happens here? King Nebuchadnezzar, what will happen in the end of days? Well, what's the end of days? What's the relative connection here? Well, Nebuchadnezzar is tied to this. This is not the eschaton. That's not what's going on. This is the future relative to Nebuchadnezzar's time. That's what's happening textually. You also have Daniel 8:19, which is similar to the kind of the connection that we've had here. What's happening here? Daniel 8:19. He said, listen, and I will tell you what will take place later in the period of wrath. We already talked about this one. Well, that's defined for it refers to the appointed time of the end. It's the time of the wrath. Now, some will point that to the eschaton. I already did a video on this, and I don't think that that's what it is. Some have argued against me on that. That's fine. But it's defined, okay? This word is defined by this period here, this section of time. It's a near future end of wrath is the way I understand the text. You get to 8:23, which is the one we're looking at. Personally, I think this is referring to a later portion of the Greek period. I think that's the proper way of understanding it. Then you have Daniel 8:14. Daniel 8:14, what is it referring to? Well, let's go to 13. But the prince of the king of Persia opposed me 21 days. So Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I left him there with the prince of the kingdom of Persia, and have come to help you understand what is to happen to your people at the end of days. For there is a further vision for those days. What is that time period? Well, the referent is the events encompassing Persia, Greece, Antiochus, near future context. That's what's going on in the text, okay? If you just pay attention to what's happening in the text itself, okay? So, when you look at the internal parallels, Daniel's style of using aarit to demarcate a later phase of an epoch, a period of time. That's what I mean by epoch, okay? That does not necessitate some sort of like final cessation, or it doesn't mean that, oh, he's talking about the eschaton. The only way you know is by the context of, this is why it's important to understand the semantic domain of the language. Okay, the claim's assumption, the assumption from the video that's claimed, is that beʻaḥarīt malkhūtām, the actual phrase after, at the end, okay, of the later phase, the claim is that equals the end of the 4 Greek kingdoms. That's the claim. Now, here's what you got to understand, friends. That assertion, that assumption, by the way, that's a claim. That's not, there was no proof of that. That claim inserts an anachronism into the text. What do I mean by that? It means that something that wasn't present, a meaning that is foreign to Daniel's idioms, his language that's being used. Now, here's where it gets fun. I'm going to pull up a tool that I have not yet shown you all inside of Logos, which I always enjoy doing that. We're going to look at the timeline, the advanced timeline inside of Logos. And the reason we're going to do this is to get to the actual claim that was made with regards to the historical sequence of things. So the historical context of this passage. The historical context was Antiochus in the latter time of their kingdoms. That's the question. Again, I'm addressing this because, well, That's the claim. So let me just recall some political situations that were going on. I don't know how much of you know the history of the Seleucid dynasties. This is roughly around 347 to 47 BC. Now, I have on the screen a time period inside of Logos, and what I'm going to search for is I'm going to search for Seleucid. I'm going to show some parameters in just a second so you know what I'm looking at. If you combine the time periods of all the individuals during that frame period, okay, it's going to be during the roughly during 347 to 47 BC. What you have going on is, and I'm also going to note a section of this time period called the Hellenistic Reform Movement that happened right around 175. Now, in 323, you have the death of Alexander. 323, basically 323. Let me look. I didn't do this before. I'm just going to do some of this with you all. Okay, Alexander. Alexander the Great, right in here. Let's see. Do we have his death? I didn't even look this up. All right. So it says 328 in here. There's always going to be a little bit of differences. The death of Alexander of Alexandria, 328. I don't see Alexander the Great arrives in 327. Okay. And you're going to see kind of some dates of what's going on during this time period right here. Okay. This is the time period that we're paying attention to. Now, when Alexander dies, his empire is fractured into 4 enduring dynasties: Macedon, Egypt, which is called Ptolemies, Asia Minor, which is the Attalids, and Syria, which is the Seleucid era, the Seleucid Empire. By the time of the 170s BC, two of those 4, Macedon and Asia Minor, were already in decline. They were actually under the Roman pressure that was going on. Antiochus IV arrives on the scene kind of in this 175 to 164 BC. Now I'm going to go back to this timeline. I'm going to type in Seleucid. And on the left-hand side, I'm actually going to itemize these to events so you can see this with specific time periods, okay? Now, here you have on the screen the beginning of the Seleucid Empire. You'll see roughly 312. Now, the dates are always a little bit fickle because it really depends on what articles you're using and what documents and whatnot, okay? But I want you to notice down here, okay, we have 312 to 65 is the Seleucid period in Greece. Now, I'm going to contend over that just a little bit because what you need to understand is that this is a complex part of his history. And the overarching part of this is the broad arc of Hellenistic history that's going on during this time period. Antiochus actually does reign. You'll see Antiochus Epiphanes right here, okay, during this time period. He reigns during the latter period of the Diadochi, or Diadochi, I think that's the way you say it. I actually have the pronunciation here in my notes so I don't get it wrong, and I already slaughtered it. But he actually does reign during the latter period of the Diadochi, there you go, Diadochi era. So during that era, remember, it's a complicated historical time period. Even within the Seleucid dynasty, during the Seleucid dynasty itself, this period of time right in here, okay, this when Antiochus comes on the scene, his reign marks the final period of aggressive expansion before there is permanent decline. In fact, most arguments, all of these down here that you're going to see post-Antiochus, there is debate whether or not they're actual kings, whether or not they're internal debates, like kind of issues going on internally. Some don't recognize them as kings or princes, or there's all kinds of issues that are going on inside of. This is the Antiochus marked the actual beginning, the permanent decline of this aggressive expansion that was going on. By the 1st century BC, the Seleucid realm was actually collapsing. It was a collapsing vassal of Rome because of the Roman pressure. Okay, so here's why I think this fits extremely well. The latter part of their kingdom fits Antiochus's historical moment, late enough in the Greek period that decline had set in, yet before total delusion. Now, there's a side note that I'm going to make here, and I'm going to get really picky, because when you make claims, especially when you have people listening to you, when you make claims, you need to be very specific and you need to be detailed if people are going to actually not catch you for like getting the wrong information. So I believe that when Jason made the claim of the analogy of, Antiochus being 8 of 29, what I caught was that this was from the levius.org resource. Now, the claim on there is that if you count down the line, there's 29 Seleucid kings. Now, again, this is a granular detail. Call me kind of splitting hairs, whatever you want to do, okay? But the point of me bringing this up is that Jason missed the complexity of the issue at hand. If you look at historical biblical scholars, and this is actually true in history itself as well, you will probably only have 21 to 23 actual kings, okay? Not 29. Now, all that Jason did is he counted down the thing and went, well, look, there's kings, okay? That was a misrepresentation of the data. The reason is that there is disputes around, are there co-rulers? Are there joint rulers? There are brief usurpers in the historical timeline. There's disputes on legitimacy. There is regional fragmentation. There's all kinds of stuff that makes this complicated. And it irritates me to no end when someone comes in, makes a short comment, and then just kind of like brushes it off. Okay. That just doesn't represent what's going on in the issues. Okay. It's important to know what the era that you're discussing might be as well. Now, Jason actually merged and conflated the Seleucid era. He conflated it with several other eras, the Maccabean era and the Mesmonian era. Those are different parts. Yes, there was the Seleucid Empire that's going on, but there are some other things that are happening that just kind of makes this more complicated. Now, one area that I would go to, okay, if I'm looking for kind of good academic arguments for this, is you could go to Lexham's Bible Dictionary, and this is the final point that I'm going to make on this. So this is a really, really, really good resource for this, and I want to show you what I mean. Notice the Greek era starts here, okay? Alexander the Great. Notice that we have Ptolemy the First, and then this one here that controlled Syria. Then we have the Ptolemaic era. Notice the timelines. Do you notice that the Ptolemaic era actually fits under the Seleucid era? Okay, just notice the timelines here. Then you have the Seleucid era. Now, this is the Seleucid era 222. If you pay attention, some of the other arguments that were made, it said, well, it started in 312. Well, that's because it depends on how you're dialoguing and engaging with the historical facts. Antiochus III technically is the first ruler of the Seleucid era. So you have Antiochus being the third of this era. Now notice why I'm making this argument. Some will look like Jason did and say, oh, there's 29. He's like at the beginning. That's misunderstanding the complexity of history. The Seleucid era turned into the Maccabean era, which you get the Maccabean revolt, the whole thing that goes on in that era. This is all Second Temple period time frame. Then you get, as I mentioned, the Hasmonean era, which brings you into the culmination of kind of that 65 BC, which is when some people will say the Seleucid era ended with regards to that. And then you get Rome, okay? Then you get the Roman era. So I want you guys to understand the complexity of what's going on. It's a horrible handling of the text to just go, see, he's like 8 of 29, move on. Move along, peons, don't pay attention to what's going on here, okay? Now I want to move into, again, I'm kind of bolstering my claim, okay? My claim is that Antiochus fits perfectly. My fourth kind of area I want to go into is what's called literary theological coherence in Daniel 8:22 to 23. Let's go back to Daniel 8:22 and 23. Now I want you to notice in Daniel 8:22 and 23. As for the horn that was broken, in place of which 4 others arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. At the end of their rule, when the transgressors have reached their full measure, a king of bold countenance shall arise, skilled in intrigue. Now, I want you to notice in verse 22, 4 kingdoms shall, some versions say, shall stand up out of the nation. This is the NRSV. So 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. And then notice here in verse 23, you have in the latter part of their rule. So the grammatical progression here, okay, the grammar implies succession and overlap. It does not imply replacement. Now, why am I saying that? Because Jason's argument is replacement. Well, it's at the very end of all of these kingdoms, and that's why the argument for the Roman Empire. At the very, very end in 65 or so, now it's Rome. That's the argument. The grammar does not allow that. It implies succession and overlap, not replacement. The fierce king. Where does the fierce king come from? It comes from among them. Hence, it comes from within one of the 4, specifically the Seleucid. That's the argument against Jason's claim. Now, this fits Antiochus. In fact, Rome does not fit this at all, okay? It doesn't fit grammatically at all, which belongs, again, when I say that, I want you to understand that Antiochus comes out of the Seleucid cultural political sphere. It comes out of. It's not a replacement of. It comes out of. Rome does not come out of it. Rome is a part of an entirely different cultural, political sphere. Entirely different. It doesn't fit grammatically. A Roman fulfillment. Yes, that's exactly right, John. Rome was after. A Roman fulfillment requires breaking the internal coherence of the narrative. The text speaks explicitly of a king emerging from the Greek offshoots, not an entirely new empire. Okay? I want that to settle in. The text explicitly, now we're just letting the text be what it is. It explicitly speaks of a king emerging from the Greek offshoots, not an entirely new empire. My fifth supporting argument for my claim, for my rebuttal on this. The clause, when we look at the text, the clause here that says, now yours might say something different, okay? Yours might say when the transgressors are come to the full, or when the transgressions have reached their full measure. Anytime you see differences in translation, that should cue you to think, there must be something going on with the original language, because they're having a hard time to translate it into English properly to get the actual ideas across. So this phrase, and in fact, if you go to, we can go to the New King James Version. In the latter time of the kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their fullness, notice that it says a king shall rise, okay? Sinister. Did you catch that some of them, I'm going to go to the NLT actually, if I can find it. The NLT had an interesting change in the text, kind of the way it came across. Did you notice that it said, he will become strong, he will cause a shocking amount of destruction and succeed in everything he does. He will destroy powerful leaders and devastate the holy people. Okay, so a little bit different rendering there of what's going on. Now, the reason I bring this up, when the transgressors have completed what? Their sins, their transgression. If you're a transgressor, you're transgressing something. This functions. This is a part of the idiomatic usages that Daniel uses. This functions as the theological clock marking the ripeness of divine intervention. This is an apocalyptic idiom that's going on. It deals with moral corruption. I'm going to go back to one that we looked at before. Genesis 15:16. What happens here? When it's complete, then divine intervention takes place. What happens in Matthew 23:32? Fill up then the measure of your ancestors, you snakes, you brood of vipers. How can you escape the judgments of hell? This is an idiomatic usage that deals with moral corruption. Some might try to connect that to today's political environment. That would be inappropriate, but some might try to connect it to that, okay? There is this ripeness, this ripeness condition, okay, that's an inclusion that deals with or indicates a moral theological milestone, not some sort of distant chronological terminus, like the final end or at the eschaton, or some time period way in the future where everything's ended. And again, I've said this before, the reason that there is such a ferocious defending of this particular interpretation in the Adventist system is because it is absolutely the linchpin. It is required. It's absolutely required to get to 1844 investigative judgment, 457, the whole framework. It is a necessity to infuse the entire system with what the Adventist teachings are. Okay, so just understand. I understand why there's a ferocious defense of it, but that doesn't really matter to me. You got to let the text say what it says. Okay. Now, during Antiochus's reign, there was, Jewish apostasy was atrocious. There is this, what was called like Hellenizing priesthood of, you may not have heard of these individuals, but Jason and Menelaus. No, that's not Jason from ADL. It's a different Jason. Okay. You can find it in 2 Maccabees 4 and 5, where you get this Hellenizing priesthood, this Jewish apostasy that's being fulfilled. That's the motif that kind of strikes through this whole thing. Okay. It's a generation's sin that's come to fulfillment. Okay. And what happens? It's inviting, again, this is the reason why I think the Antiochus interpretation fits beautifully, because it's inviting a divine deliverance through the Maccabean revolt. That's the whole point. That's the reason Antiochus fits this particular historical situation. Okay. Moral depravity is happening even inside of Jewish kind of apostasy. There's pressure from those around. Antiochus comes in. There's all kinds of demolishing that's going on. There's pressure. There's persecution. There's oppression. There's obviously what he does with the altar and the pig and Zeus and like all this stuff that goes on. And then there is this divine deliverance that occurs through the Maccabean revolt. Okay. Now, as I did in the last episode, and I'm going to do again here, what about the early Jewish reception of this? What would we look at for that? Now, if you have, this is why it's really important, if you have like the NRSV UE, the updated edition, you can just turn inside of there to some Second Temple intertestamental books. So you could look at First Maccabees 1, 10, and 11. And I want you to notice, okay, this is Second Temple sources near the event that confirm this understanding. What does it say? From them came forth a sinful root. Antiochus Epiphanes, son of King Antiochus. He had been a hostage in Rome. He began to reign in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. In those days, certain renegades came out from Israel and misled many, saying, "Let us go and make a covenant with the nations around us. For since we separate from them, many disasters have come upon us." Again, this is the Jewish understanding. Now, someone might argue, why would you believe the Jewish understanding when they didn't even understand the Messiah? That's a horrible argument. That's a horrible argument, because then you would just negate all of the Hebrew scriptures. Okay, so just please don't say that. Please don't mishandle. Oh, I hate it when people say that kind of stuff. Those kind of arguments don't handle text for what it is, ancient documents. So this directly echoes, this passage right here directly echoes Daniel 8:23. Out of one of them came a little horn. Now, the author of First Maccabees reads Daniel's latter time as the generation of Antiochus. It's not some far future era. Okay, so this is an understanding that's contextualized. Now, you can also look at 2 Maccabees 7:17 to 19. Keep on and see how his mighty power will torture you and your descendants. After him, this is talking about the moral corruption and what's going to happen, okay? After him, they brought forth the sixth. And when he was about to die, he said, do not deceive yourself in vain, for we are suffering these things on our own account because of our sins, because against our own God. So notice that this is like the transgression. This is like moral depravity. This is going to interpret the crisis as the moment by which God's wrath is about to expire. Another echoing of Daniel, for example, this latter time of the indignation. So these are very early interpreters, okay? The earliest interpreters that exist in the same period of time that's going on. They are going to interpret these events or recognize them as their own time, as Daniel's latter period. Now, you might push back against it, but I'm showing you all of the reasons that I am supporting this. Again, Hanukkah is connected to this, so there's that avenue and that aspect as well. All right, we're not done yet, but we're getting close. I oftentimes will bring in what's called a philological precision, okay? And what I mean by that is I want to make sure that when we look at the text, that we aren't doing the wrong things with the text. So if we go back to Daniel 8:23, and this is the aarit malkhūtām, the end of their rule. Here's what the phrase does not include, and it's really important. You don't always look at what it does include. It's also important to say, well, what does it not deal with? What is it not? So here's what it does not include. Pay attention down here on the bottom part of the screen. You're looking for articles, grammatical articles. I will tell you what these are. At is in the original language, is a preposition. You might see the here, but you'll see an arrow and you'll see an empty spot in the manuscript. That is added in English, okay? It's added to help translate the word aarit, okay? Aarit is not an article. It's not. It's a common noun. Moving on. Notice that we have of their rule. Notice of points back to aarit, the end of, and then there is a pronoun, third person pronoun. Rule is a singular noun. Now, you might have noticed this over here as with a dot, this number 1. Anytime there is a dot in the actual surface text, that means there is an underlying original language word that didn't get translated. So let's see if that's it. No, that's actually a conjunction. That's a conjunction. So my point in being very detailed about this is technically there is no definite article. There is no the end, meaning a definitive terminus like the end. Okay. So it would be horrible to think that, well, that's what this means. There's no article. Okay. It just means aarit. It's a period of time and it's contextualized to what the time period in the text defines it as. The second thing that it does not have the phrase we talked about or the word we talked about last time. The last time we actually looked at verse 17, you'll see this word end. Now, some of you with your English Bibles, you'll notice, well, there's the word end, right? I mean, this end is the same as this one, right? No, this is aarit. This end is kes. These are not the same words. This original word, okay, does have a termination, an end point. Okay. You can define that. And what is it by? That the vision is for the time of the end. Well, you need to define what that end point is. We talked about that last episode. Go watch it. Okay. So my point in bringing this up is that there is no terminus in this word. It does not have a terminal ending. It's not there. It's not the same word. The third thing that is not present, this word does not have any eschatological markers that are found elsewhere in Daniel. What do I mean by markers? Okay, if you go to like Daniel 12:13, this end of days, this is an eschatological marker. I will talk about this at a time period, some time period in the future of these episodes, okay? This is partly why Daniel 12 could be understood as the transition from Daniel's current time period to a future time period. 8 through 11 deal with, again, this is a part of the argument for the authorship and dating of Daniel. So 12 does have eschatological markers. It could have been written by someone else besides Daniel. These are the arguments, okay? I'm not saying this is what I'm claiming. And because it has eschatological arguments, then yes, chapter 12 does transition to the eschaton, the end of days, okay? I bring this up because this can be the referent for Jesus when he says and refers to, Antiochus refers to, okay, this is the argument. I'm not saying this is the right argument, but this could be a referent back to what Jesus is referring to. I know that I've gotten to some dialogues back and forth on this particular aspect. I will say this, just in passing, on this particular topic. When it comes to dating the book of Daniel, when it comes to the authorship of the book of Daniel, there are some very Christian, evangelical, hold scripture in high regard scholars, okay, that do take the latter date and that actually claim that several people wrote Daniel. Just because that's the case, that doesn't negate the prophetic aspect. Just understand, there are ways of dealing with the textual variations in the book. There are ways of dealing with the dating issue, the scribal issues, the Aramaic issues, which, by the way, there are both early and later Aramaic words that are being used. That's part of the issue. So just understand that we have to wrestle with these things together, okay? In such a way that we also recognize that we're all trying to get to the same place, meaning we're all trying to honor Scripture. We're all Christ followers. Okay. So I don't want these types of dialogues to denigrate into like, well, you must not be a Christian if you take this stance. That's we shouldn't be doing that. Okay. So back to the argument. Instead, as you look at this argument, we have the argument in the text of Daniel 8:23. We have a construct phrase meaning simply, again, just meaning the latter portion of their rule. Again, that's why it gets translated this way. At the end of their rule, the four kingdoms, the four kings, at the end of their rule, okay? So pressing, anyone that presses this aarit into the meaning that the very last day of Grecian rule, which was the argument that Jason made. Oh, this has got to be at the very last. This has to be Rome. Listen carefully, friends. That argument exceeds lexical data, meaning this just isn't in the text. It's not there. It's inserted. It's not in the actual language. It's just another clear piece of evidence. And this is my pushback, okay? It's another clear piece of evidence. The ADL doesn't understand how the language actually works. They have got to up their game if I'm going to take them serious on this stuff. The last aspect, and this is like point number 8 to support my claim in this particular situation, and that is comparison with other apocalyptic chronologies. I talked about idioms, right? In prophetic idioms, the latter time idiom that frequently gets used, it usually denotes, and if I don't know that I've said this before, but an idiom is something that has a meaning not deduced from the actual words themselves. I'll give you an English example. You've probably heard someone say it's raining cats and dogs. You can't deduce, okay? You can't deduce what that means from the actual words itself. You have to know what that phrase means in order to deduce what it means, okay? Another one would be like, see the light. You can't see the light, okay? It's an idiom, all right? And you've got to understand what an idiom is, especially a prophetic idiom. I'm talking too much. So what I want you to get is that prophetic idioms usually have one of these three things. They're a transition from prosperity to judgment. That would be one idiom, prophetic idiom. I'll show you an example of this just so you, again, don't take my word for it, study it, okay? Deuteronomy 31:29. Here's this aarit ya yamim. For I know that after my death you will surely act corruptly, turning aside from the way that I have commanded you. In time to come, this is the idiom, okay? Trouble will befall you because you do what is evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger through work of your hands. That is a transition from prosperity to judgment. It is a prophetic idiom that's being used. The second way that it gets used is what would be called a climactic phase within history. We see this in Hosea 3:5. Afterward, the Israelites shall return and seek the Lord their God and David their king. They shall come in awe to the Lord and in his goodness in the latter days. Notice here, we've got ahar, that's in the semantic domain, okay, and aarit, which is in the latter days, okay, afterwards and then in the latter days. This is a climactic phase within history. So within Hosea's text, it's afterward Israel is going to return to Yahweh. That's what's happening. Now, the last one is the one we're dealing with, okay? Daniel 8:23, the text that we're dealing with, this idiom gets used as moral culmination that's preceding divine action. I talked about this last time, right? There's this increase in moral corruption, and there's going to be divine judgment that occurs because of it. This is all over the Old Testament. So apocalyptic literature characteristically views history in cyclical sequences. Again, I'm talking about apocalyptic literature. Daniel is apocalyptic literature, at least parts of it. And so it should be understood in this cyclical sequence where there's a rise, a hubris, and a fall. Antiochus's reign, Antiochus IV, his reign specifically, sits squarely at the terminal hubris in this cycle where there's oncoming fall, and then after it, there will be a complete fall. This is the moment in the Hellenistic age when you have this rise, hubris, fall cycle going on. All right, let me summarize what we've got so far. And then we're going to shut it down because we've already been at it for an hour and 15. It seems like every single one of these get longer and longer. But we've just got to deal with the text, friends. We've got to make sure that we give you good textual evidence. And I want you to understand why I don't hold the Rome papal power interpretation of the Adventist church. It's not because I hate the church. It's not because whatever it might be. It's because it's not textually grounded. It's a horrible rendition of or interpretation of. And the reason that that's the case, the reason is because the Adventist interpretation is a defense of a doctrine that comes from a failure, 1844. By the way, it was 1844, October, right? I mean, that was a couple days ago. I don't know why they celebrate that, by the way. I don't know why you would celebrate a failure. Anyways, whole other topic for another discussion. So here's what we've got. Here's the summary. The Hebrew syntax indicates a later phase, not final extinction. When we look at Antiochus's era, 175 to 164 BC, that definitely fulfills the latter phase within Greek history, historically. With regards to the 8th of 29, which there aren't even 29 kings, it's more like 21 to 23. But irregardless of that, with regards to the 8th of the 21 to 29, numerically true, okay, but it's irrelevant. That's a red herring. It makes no sense. And again, it's designed to just deflect off the issue, okay? It's irrelevant. That is not a good argument because Antiochus's reign, by Antiochus's reign, the Seleucid system itself had already begun to collapse. The latter days, like it fits, okay? With regards to the prophecy kind of points beyond Greece to Rome, well, the text explicitly situates the new king as emerging from the Greek divisions. That's verses 22 to 23. Rome would require a new symbolic beast. It wouldn't emerge from it. Would require a new one, which is what we see in chapters like 7 and 11. Lastly, the reference to like latter time implies an eschatological framework. No, it doesn't. Okay. Within Daniel and contemporary apocalyptic idioms that are going to be used in the text, aarit denotes a climactic moment within history. The moment when divine wrath ends, it perfectly matches the Antiochene crisis. And the only time you get something that could be the eschaton is Daniel chapter 12. That's it. So grammatically, it's very clear. Grammatically, this text, okay, at the end of their rule, grammatically signifies during the latter portion of the rule. It's a phrase. It's not a terminal catastrophe. And historically speaking, Antiochus IV reigned precisely as the Hellenistic empires waned. Remember that? Waxed and waned before rising the rise of Rome. So theologically, this was the maturity of transgression. Theologically, it was foreseen by Daniel 8:23. Textually, the text itself, the king of fierce countenance, the king of bold countenance, fierce countenance, whatever your language or your version says. The king of fierce countenance, bold countenance, arises among them. This absolutely seals the Seleucid identification. It's required. Okay, if you miss this, and again, I don't know how or why Jason missed it, but you can't get away from it here in the text. So with all this evidence, the Antiochus theory accommodates every element of the verse's linguistic, contextual, and historical data. The so-called latter time is actually his time. It's Antiochus's time. The moral and political exhausted twilight period of the Hellenistic dominion. That's exactly what it is. Well, what are we going to address next? That's the reason why I totally think that the actual argument that's made by Jason, the claim is erroneous and not upheld by the text. It doesn't get upheld linguistically, it doesn't get upheld contextually, and it most certainly doesn't get upheld historically. What are we dealing with next? Well, the fourth claim. Here's the fourth claim. The fourth claim is that the little horn is said to be broken without hand. Well, Antiochus died of natural causes. So how would this be a supernatural intervention? That's the question. And with this, Jason, ADL, and the Adventist system will quickly point their fingers to their favorite suspect, Rome and the papal power. Friends, I will see you next time because we're going to refute that poor interpretation and we're going to wrestle with the text together. As always, I would absolutely love for you to join the Discord channel. Even if you're a devout Adventist, even if you'd like to debate and dialogue about this, let us know when you join the Discord channel because we actually have a place reserved for that exact thing where we can wrestle together with the text. Let's sharpen our perspectives together as good theologians. We're all theologians. Let's do this in a wise way as all good theologians should do. Hey, do me a favor, friends. Will you hit the like button? Share the video with someone you care about. Scan the QR code. Join Discord. I hope to see you there. I hope you get a friendly welcome as you enter into dialogue together. Be blessed, friends. Keep it real. Stay in the text, and we will see you next time.